I call Ian McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm not surprised they're applauding that speech, Mr Speaker. I don't dislike anyone much in life, but I certainly think some of the things they say are odd. And if the previous Speaker thinks that the government's going to lift people out of poverty, he's got another thing coming, because unfortunately it is not the government that lifts people out of poverty. It's an economy that's driven by a sound policy that lifts people out of poverty. So he has got his foot firmly in the wrong hole, Mr Speaker. Last year, Mr Speaker, I started addressing this very same debate with the statement that we in the Rangitikei support the return to surplus. We are there. I also said we needed to grow production, not consumption. We are getting there. And we must support families, was the other thing I talked about, and we are certainly getting there as well. Mr Speaker, it's a privilege to be part of a government led by John Key and Bill English, which have firstly performed better than any other Western economy in the past 5 years, have produced an economy which is growing at a rate of 2 to 4% and 4% this year over the next 5 years, and retained a government debt to 26% of GDP. Again, a great performance by any standard, especially given the fact that we've maintained support to our beneficiaries in every respect during the course of that recession. We've put significant extra resource into education and health sectors and continue to support New Zealand's most needy families. In the past 4 days, I have, and I heard Jackie Dean earlier talking about it, travelled extensively in my electorate, as I do on a weekly basis, and I do have an electorate that takes about even longer than John Hayes to drive from one end to the other, because he's got straight roads. But, Mr Speaker, I've travelled extensively in the electorate. I've never seen a positive reception to anything that's happened in New Zealand like I have in the Rangitikei in the last few days, since the days of fertiliser subsidies. Of course, we in the Rangitikei were very keen on those fertiliser subsidies back in the 60s. Did you, John? So thank you. It's very good of you. Anyway, the interesting thing about this budget and this fertiliser subsidies is that a lot of the aspiration in this budget will achieve exactly what the fertiliser subsidies of the 60s did. They'll increase productivity, they'll increase the country's wealth, and they'll increase family security. Mr Speaker, the difference between this budget and those of the last Labor government is this government very clearly spends money where they'll get a great return for the people of New Zealand. Children's health lasts for a lifetime, Mr Speaker. The family tax credit puts money where it's needed in the very newly born families of New Zealand. Law and order, Mr Speaker, where this government in the past 5 years has achieved some amazing results. A 26% reduction in youth crime, a 20% reduction in overall crime, and reoffending has reduced to 12.6%. This, in fact, means some 9,300 fewer victims on an annual basis. That, Mr Speaker, is very significant. The government has also put another $10 million into help the fight against sexual violence, which is certainly an issue that blights a large number of New Zealand families. I heard Mr Goff earlier speaking about the law and order sector, and he fails to accept that the modernisation that has been undertaken in the law and order sector in the last 5 years has made huge differences to the efficiencies of that sector. This government has maintained the number of police on the street in New Zealand. It has done a wonderful job, in my view, of upgrading and modernising our prison service, and we now have people leaving prison with some real hope of work and not of going back to prison. Mr Speaker, these are some of the reasons why the people of the Rangitikei are so positive about this budget. I called in to buy a bit of lunch at my local takeaway shop yesterday, and oddly enough I knew the owner, and the boss literally ran out and shook my hand, telling me what a great budget it was. I immediately knew what Bill English felt like. He was excited about the budget. He has a young family, and he knew that the actions undertaken in this budget will make a difference to his future and to his family's future. Mr Speaker, defence in the Rangitikei plays a very important role. Another $535 million has been injected into the Defence Forces. In my electorate I have Linton, Ahakia and the Wairau Army bases, all of which will benefit significantly from the extra resource that's been put into the Defence Forces. That will make a big difference to my part of the world, and I'm sure it will give our Defence Forces a whole lot of new confidence. Mr. Speaker, I want to touch briefly on housing too, because I have a very different issue in my electorate, and I know a large number of our my rural compatriots have the same. We have no shortage of housing, but we certainly welcome anyone to our region who'd like to come and live there. And the policies of this government are giving people incentive to come back and live in rural New Zealand. Jobs in tourism, agriculture and the service sectors around those two major industries are creating new opportunity for people in our electorates. There's plenty of opportunity for those people who find difficulty living elsewhere to come and live in our electorates and make the most of it. I also want to talk very briefly, Mr. Speaker, about the Manawatu Community Housing Trust, which runs all of the ex-council houses in Fielding. They've done an amazing job with those 212 houses in Fielding. They've got them all up to date, working very well and fully tenanted. And I think that there's a lot of merit in community housing trusts being set up and continuing, as our Housing Minister has indeed encouraged in many parts of New Zealand. I also want to talk briefly about the science funding, which I'm particularly pleased about, and particularly the addition of $57 million to the Contestable Research Fund, which will make a big difference to the activities of the research institutes around Massey University, which of course is in the heart of my electorate. Also the investment of $83 million to raise tuition subsidies in science, health and agriculture. Three parts of our economy which are critical to our future and which are, particularly in the science and agriculture departments, producing great results from an export income potential, and of course health is going to be critical to our futures, to the futures of us all. Mr. Speaker, this government is one that invests where the most benefit accrues to the people of New Zealand. We invest in areas that pay a dividend for the future. We invest in the long-term gain for the future generations. The single most encouraging item for me in this budget is the projected household income growth over the next 4 years. I think this is the single most important thing we can achieve in New Zealand, is to grow people's income and their ability to earn. And I think that the projected increase of some $7,000 by 2018 in the average take-home pay is a pretty significant effort, and I think it will probably improve further on that, given the growth our economy's expecting, and certainly given the performance of our export sector at the moment. So I think we can look forward to, with a great deal of confidence, to the result that this government's achieved, particularly around increasing people's take-home pay, their ability to live better than they could before. One of the challenges of our agriculture sector has faced over the years has been inconsistency of income, hence profit leading to a boom and bust mentality, where we have very high taxation one year and the potential for a refund the next. Not conducive to good business. And I know the agricultural sector for years has battled with this. This government faces the same challenges with economic growth, and one of the challenges our Finance Minister has chosen to do battle with during the course of this budget is that fact that we have to get some sustainability into our growth patterns, rather than having dramatic growth spells and then losing that growth potential. So I think he's done very well with that, and the sustainable budget doesn't dramatically increase government expenditure, and of course government expenditure has a great influence on what happens with inflation, interest rates and all sorts of other things. So very moderate increases in government expenditure is extremely important. So I think the Finance Minister has done extremely well with that. This party and government believe in empowering individuals and families to do better, to achieve their aspirations, to compete in the modern world. The parties on the other side of the House aspire to capture individuals and families and trap them in a sea of state dependence. Mr. Speaker, I think that is definitely the wrong attitude. The people of New Zealand understand this now and will support a government who free them to seize the opportunity available to them and keep interference in their lives to a minimum. Finally, I want to congratulate Minister English on a very competent budget and hope for New Zealand's sake he gets the opportunity to produce many more of them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ko Meka Whaitiri.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker.